Subliminal is a game I had no idea about at all. I'm vaguely aware of things like the Backrooms and these liminal space games where you have monsters and all that sort of stuff, but I've never actually played one myself. So when this one popped up on Steam, I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a try and see how it goes. It looked fantastic from the images, the graphics quality was really, really appealing to me, and I actually quite liked the sense of nostalgia with kind of swimming pools and places like that I would visit in my childhood. So I thought I'd give this one 20 minutes and see if it hooked me and if it had me wanting to play more or whether it was just a waste of time. So let's jump on in. Story. The story in Subliminal is told through narration, so with voiceover only and subtitles, and there's not a huge amount going on, but what I managed to ascertain from the first 20 minutes was that you are being talked to possibly by your subconscious, and you are reliving memories. Later on in my 20 minutes, I managed to get a kind of a memory meter, which is a little box, and you basically have to piece together memories, and each time you piece together a memory or, achieve something, it adds a notch to this little box. So there's kind of the story setup is you're trying to remember things that happened perhaps in your childhood. It's told in a really kind of interesting way. I really liked the voiceover. I thought it was quite natural. It had a very Stanley Parable kind of feel to it. But story-wise, I wasn't that bothered about what's going on and who my character is and all that sort of stuff. It was just very much there to, I feel, push me through these different environments and give me a reason to explore. So as far as story is concerned, yeah, this isn't a story game. You're not going to want to keep playing this for the narrative, I don't think. It really is just there to encourage exploration, which isn't a bad thing. But yeah, it could have been a little bit more fleshed out, perhaps. So I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10. Controls. So there's quite a minimal HUD interface in this one, in that there isn't that much on screen to kind of guide you around. But basically, you're using the mouse and keyboard to move around, or at least I was on Steam. And you can interact with things in the environment, basically. And it's all via pressing the E key or pressing the mouse buttons to interact with items that are lit up. You don't really see things that you can interact with until you get really up close to them, and it's a lot of trial and error as far as looking around the rooms for items that you can click on and move and manipulate in different ways. But it did give me quite a lot of flexibility. I didn't really feel like I was struggling with the controls at all. The only thing I would really change is perhaps so that this kind of guide as to what I can and can't pick up on kind of activated perhaps a little bit further from the item, because some of them I was really having to crouch on the floor and get really close up to things before it would let me click on them. And I think quite often I probably walked past things that I could potentially have interacted with just because I didn't see that item prompt pop up. There are a few puzzles early on in the game, one including a clock and one including a fridge, that mechanically were fine. You can just basically click and move things around, move the hand pointers around, or move the letters and things around on the fridge. It was quite simple to use. The actual solutions of them, I'll get onto that when I'm talking about gameplay, but it could have been a little bit clearer, I think, perhaps. But overall, the controls here are functional. They're fine. There's nothing crazy. There's nothing new and experimental. It was just very much functional, moving around the environment. So I think it didn't get in the way of the gameplay, but it was just bog standard controls, really. So I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10. Atmosphere. Now, with a combination of the absolutely incredible graphics, which I'll get onto in a minute, and the brilliant sound design, this really did just pull me right in. I think if you're playing this and you perhaps grew up in the 80s or 90s like myself, seeing these kind of items and things from your past and these kind of environments that you probably have explored a lot yourself as a child, it really did just pull me in. I think the fact there isn't a huge user interface, as I said in the controls section, it's actually a real bonus in this, because you do just get immersed and you do end up just moving around the environment and exploring a little. And I did really get lost, not literally, but I did get lost in these worlds. They're just really believable. They're really realistic. There's something about the lighting, the physics, the kind of the sound that's going on. It sounds like it's been recorded kind of, from a mobile phone or from a personal recorder or something. It doesn't sound like you've got kind of cinematic audio quality going on here. You've got a really nice kind of realistic, believable feel to things, and it really does just pull you in. I think as far as immersion's concerned, I was a little bit on edge when I was playing this, and I think that's the intention. This is supposed to be kind of a horror game, I guess, although in the first 20 minutes there isn't a lot of horror going on. It did just make me feel unease, it made me feel on edge, and it totally had me hooked. And to be honest, when I got to the end of my game, I always say this about really good games that I've enjoyed, I did not want to stop playing it. When I got to 20 minutes, I really wanted to just carry on exploring, and that's all down to just how immersed I was in this experience. So for that, I mean, I really can't fault it, to be honest. It feels a bit strange to give it such a high score because, I didn't really experience anything apart from just walking around, but I was absolutely massively immersed in this, and I would have to give this a 9 out of 10. Music and sound. As far as music's concerned, there's not a lot going on. I believe there was probably some kind of, ambient sound design going on that was more sound design than music. And nothing really jumps out in my memory. I've just finished playing it, and there's nothing really in there as far as music's concerned, apart from a couple of beds and the menus and things. And also, you have kind of a TV on in the background at one point, and there's a game show playing, and there's kind of idents and jingles and stuff going on. Also, the music builds up. There's kind of an off-screen monster that does come after you if you take too long on a puzzle, for example. And it builds up, and it's quite intense, and I think that's a nice segue on to talking about the sound design. The sound design is absolutely fantastic in this. It's just really realistic. Everything's really grounded in the world. You start off in this kind of dreamlike place, and then you go through kind of an underground basement, and then you end up in a swimming pool kind of complex, like a leisure center, and every sound fit perfectly in those places. And the leisure center kind of swimming pool area at the end, it really did just sound, the acoustics and everything were absolutely spot on. You had really like loud echoes from things that were off in the distance, and there's just really nice ambient sounds playing out. I felt like every item that I was walking past had its own kind of sound that was playing, whether it was a fountain or, a ride that was going around by itself and things. It's just really well done. It just does feel really, really real. And I can imagine that a lot of this was just recorded in one of these actual environments. Or if it hasn't been, then it's had some absolutely fantastic kind of post-production work on it to make it sound believable and to make everything sound like it was coming from those actual areas. Most of the sound is actually really grounded and really believable. When it did come in with this kind of monster, horror, sci-fi sound effect, it was still grounded in the world, and it really did make you think, oh, crap, something's coming to get me. And it was very believable, and it was almost felt like I was watching kind of Blair Witch kind of found footage stuff, because it just got that believable, really, really grounded. And it just put the hairs on the back of my neck standing up the first time it happened. And then after it happened, I made sure I didn't make the same mistake twice, because it was just put you on edge. Even though there's nothing there, it really is just the sound that made this one scary, which is fantastic. Finally, the voiceover in this I thought was done really well. It was really well acted out. Again, I mentioned it had a kind of a Stanley Parable kind of vibe to it, and I always hold that game as quite, a strong one when it comes to voiceovers and voice acting and things. And this was kind of up there. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's not as memorable. The guy isn't really coming across as a memorable character at all, but it was done really well. And it just kept the intrigue going. So from an audio perspective, this is an absolute treat from a sound perspective, and I'm going to give this one 9 out of 10. Graphics and style. Following on from the music and the sound on this one, the graphics are just incredible, really. I mean, I think if I'd gone back to being a child and shown myself this game and said this is a video game, I almost wouldn't have believed that graphics were able to get this good. It's almost like real, to be fair. I think a combination of the graphics and the kind of the physics as you're moving around. One thing to note was the kind of the bouncy castle that appeared at the start. I couldn't stop bouncing on it, and I think it just looked really, really realistic. It's almost like it was scanned into the computer, perhaps, and just lit really well, really believable. The ray tracing that's going on and everything, it just looked stunning. And I think that combined with the kind of the movement and the camera sway and the camera bobbing as I was moving around on the bouncy castle, again, it did just make me feel like I was kind of reliving my childhood moments exploring these kind of areas. It didn't feel like I was playing a video game all of a sudden, which is a really hard thing to describe, but it's not something that I've really run into before. I've never really had game graphics trick me so much into thinking that these are real, kind of believable places. Obviously, the other environments that we get onto, the basement and the kind of the water park, do seem a little bit more video gamey, but they still do have that kind of air of realism around them, and they're just an absolute joy to explore. And I found myself kind of stopping and just looking at things, which is something I only do when the graphics really are grabbing me. I was just, studying what buttons were like, how water was refracting light, and particles and all that kind of stuff that normally in a game I appreciate, but I don't stop and look at. Here I really did just stop and admire it all. It's not really going for anything stylish, I don't think. I think it is playing it safe in that it's going for realism and everything is really grounded. There was nothing that jumped out at me as being kind of sci-fi or horror, apart from perhaps there's some kind of silhouettes of some children on the floor, and the design of a clock that's involved in one of the puzzles was a little bit freaky. But everything else apart from that seemed really grounded, and I think it's just a really strong package. The guys that made this game really have achieved something absolutely fantastic, and it ran absolutely fine on my computer as well. So yeah, from a graphics point of view, I haven't seen anything better than this. I don't think this is a 10 out of 10. Gameplay. So with all the praise of sound and graphics and so on, what was it actually like to play it? Well, to start with, you are kind of just walking around and listening to a voiceover at the start, and then you end up in a basement where there are some simple puzzles to solve. One of them involved picking up some letters off the floor and rearranging them on a fridge to kind of spell out a name, and the other one is a puzzle with a clock. Now, I dedicated so much time to these two puzzles. A huge chunk of my 20 minutes was spent on these puzzles. One of them I managed to figure out for myself, and the other one I had to resort to a guide, which is disappointing because I shouldn't really have to do that when I'm only playing for 20 minutes. I should be able to figure stuff out. But yeah, there's a really steep learning curve here, and I think unless you're massively paying attention, you're going to miss solutions. There's going to be a mild spoiler here, but basically the letters on the fridge need to be rearranged to spell out the name of the main character who you are playing as, and I could not work this out for myself. I had no idea what my character was called, if I even was a character, or whether I was just kind of a spirit floating around this world. And then the fact that I had to spell out that person's name, I had no idea. I literally had to pause the game and go and Google the answer, which is disappointing because I don't like to do that. I really do like to figure things out for myself. But I thought, I can't just play for 20 minutes and just be looking at this fridge because this is going to get a really bad review. But just to bear in mind, if you're not a massive puzzle person, or perhaps you missed something really simple that I also missed, perhaps there's something really obvious that I just didn't clock. Yeah, it was too tricky for me, which is disappointing. And also the clock puzzle, again, it's just I didn't have the time really, no pun intended, to really get into it. I was getting frustrated with it. I couldn't figure out what time I had to set it to. You have to move the hands around on the clock to try and set a specific time. I had no idea what I was doing, and then I heard really nice, really satisfying something in the background on the TV that just mentioned the time. And I thought, I wonder if I just pop it to that. I did. That completed the puzzle, and I was so pleased. And actually, I thought, right, that's a really good puzzle. It's really nice. I was getting a little bit frustrated, and just before I gave up, the solution was right there, playing on loop in the background all along as part of the world design, which I thought was really nice. It's not obvious, but if you're paying attention, it's there. And I imagine the thing with the name of the person on the fridge, I imagine that's a similar thing where there's just something really obvious that I missed out, but I could not for the life of me figure out what that was. And also the name that came out, it's not really a common name here in the UK, so I don't think I would have just identified it by looking at the letters either, unless it was like Peter or something like that. It would have been more obvious to me. Aside from those two simple puzzles, you basically just walk around the environment exploring, and I went on a water ride, which was good, on a kind of a raft that took you around a track. And then you have to unlock memories. As I said, you walk around, and when you complete certain things, such as going on the ride, it will give you a little notch on the memory meter. And then, yeah, I guess I'm kind of encouraged to go on and explore a little bit more. But apart from that, there's not much else to do. The only other thing I had to do was a very, very annoying, tedious puzzle where doors at each side of the room would keep opening. I had to run from one to the other, and this went on for far too long, and it was not fun at all. Gameplay-wise, I really wasn't that hooked. This is kind of pitched as a horror experience, And apart from a couple of creepy things like the clock's eyes looking at me and the sound of something coming stomping up behind me in the dark, a few times caught me on edge, but it really isn't a horror experience, I would say. It's an exploration thing, so it's probably going to be quite fun. But yeah, just the first 20 minutes, not a whole lot to do, really. I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. The standout moment for me generally was just admiring the graphics, and I think that really did come together at the start when I was playing on the Bounty Castle. I know it's a very simple thing, but I just really enjoyed it. It was just a pleasure to look at, and I was kind of in disbelief that the game could look this good. So yeah, it was really, really memorable. I'm going to remember the graphics massively on this, if nothing else. Final verdict, if you've got 20 minutes, is this worth your time? If you just want to really admire some graphics and have a look at some technical stuff, and you want to see how well your computer can display things and how good you are at ray tracing, and you want to listen to some pretty top-notch sound work, then this is definitely worth a look. I think if you've got a kind of nostalgia for these sort of places that you experience in here, which you can see from the trailers and the screenshots and so on, then it might be worth having a look as well. Whether I think it's worth buying, I can't really say. It's almost like it was a technical demo for me. The gameplay itself was nothing to write home about. The controls are very standard. It really was all about the graphics and the sound for me. And I think it's marketed as a kind of a horror experience, but I think you really need to put in a lot more time than 20 minutes to be able to have anything kind of scary. Apart from one or two kind of little creepy bits, there's nothing really massively here that's going to freak you out. So I think this is a pass from me personally. I really did enjoy looking at the game and listening to the game, and it had a strong kind of nostalgic immersion to it, but it's not something that I'm interested in continuing to play at all, really. I feel like I've kind of seen what it has to offer. But yeah, this is not a recommendation for me, but that's not to say it doesn't have an audience. The final score I'm going to give this one is 7 out of 10. It should really be a 6, but I'm giving it a 7 just because the graphics are they're just next level. So what do you think? Is this sort of game for you? Have you played other games like this? Let me know down in the comments. And if you like this sort of thing, these kind of reviews of the openings of video games and analysis of whether it's worth your time and whether they're worth playing beyond the first 20 minutes, then please do give me a subscribe. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and recommendations for the games down in the comments. Thanks so much, and I'll see you on the next one.